Kristens Daughter with all the books, and I am here with the first wrap up for my 30 books in 30 days personal challenge. So these are the books that I read in the first 10 days of July. Diving right in, we have Shoah, 1953 to 1989, A History of Japan. I won't talk about these too much because I've been reading them and talking about them for several months now. I really enjoyed this series of graphic novels. They begin in 1926, leading up to World War II and how Japan got involved in the ways that they did. So it's nonfiction, but also a memoir. So Shigeru Mizuki was actually a soldier in World War II and ended up becoming a manga artist. So I highly recommend those if you are into that sort of thing. Then I finished The Night Tiger by Yangtze Chu. This is set in 1930s Malaysia. It's historical fiction, focused on the hospital setting. So it centers around a couple doctors, one that has just passed away with a missing finger, and one doctor who cut it off. There's a houseboy that has been charged with finding the missing finger and burying it with the doctor so he can rest in peace. There's a set of twins. There's a brother and sister, stepbrother, stepsister in I don't know what I'm trying to say, but you know what I'm trying to say. This book was so entertaining. If you're looking for historical fiction with great narrative and great characters, one that just pulls you along and is a very enjoyable read, I would highly suggest this. It's also got just a tiny touch of mystery, a tiny touch of romance, a tiny touch of magical realism, just a bit. I think Sean might even find this palatable. So I really just a very enjoyable read for me. Then I finished 3 middle grade stories. And middle grade, these are on the lower spectrum of middle grade. I got them from my elementary librarian. They were involved in contests that the 4th and 5th grade library club did with other schools in the area. And librarians from each school that participated picked one of the books to be involved in this competition. So they're 4th and 5th grade level, which I don't always get along personally with my enjoyment with that grade level. It's just kind of hit or miss for me. So these were very interesting to think about why that is. So Moo by Sharon Creech. I've always loved Sharon Creech. She is a Newbery Award winning author several times over. This is just a little book about a family living in the big city, and they decide they've had enough of that lifestyle and move to the country, to Maine. They meet an older woman who has a little house, not a farm, but she's got like an acre or so with a few animals, and one of them is a cow. And this is in Maine. This is set in Maine, and this one is written in verse. And I gotta say, I think books written in verse are exactly my thing all the time. All the time. I just always enjoy those. The next one that I finished was Sarah Weeks and Gita Varadarajan. Sorry, it's a long name. Save Me a Seat. This is a contemporary fiction story centered around 2 boys one of which has just moved to the area. Both of them don't fit in because the one boy is from India and just moved to the States, and the other boy is really big for his age and goes to the resource classroom because he has a little bit of a learning disability and is very sensitive to sounds. So this book was one that I really appreciated it as a story for young readers. I think they would enjoy it and get a lot out of it. However, I found it a little boring as an adult reader. So there's that one. And then The Hero, Two Doors Down by Sharon Robinson. Hold the press. This is written by Jackie Robinson's daughter. It's centered around a little boy in a family that in New York City ends up living 2 doors down from Jackie Robinson for a year. And this is based on a true story. So Sharon Robinson interviewed the guy and retold stories from her own childhood that she heard passed around the dinner table and, you know, at holidays, how those stories get retold. I love this. I was here for it. It also talks about the boy's family is from a Jewish tradition, and, you know, Jackie Robinson was from a Christian tradition, and how those interplayed. And it just touched on, you know, the ending of segregation and racism, and, you know, this is his first couple years in the major leagues as the first Black man in professional baseball. And I absolutely loved this. So I don't know, maybe I do like verse 100%, and maybe historical fiction does well for me. Now, nonfiction at this grade level typically does not work for me, but maybe that's my thing. Maybe historical fiction and verse. I don't know. We'll keep dabbling in that area because I'm going to be teaching elementary again this year. Anyway, the next one I finished was How Not to Die Alone by Richard Roeper. This is kind of a contemporary romance, but the main character in this one is the guy. It's in UK, okay, and the humor in this, I just about fell out of my chair a couple times. It was just so dry and witty, and I thought it was so funny. But anyway, this guy is working for the National Institute of Health, I think. Well, he's working for the government, and his work group, in his capacity, he goes into homes where people have died alone. He goes in and tries to look around and find some evidence of family or friends that he can contact, and make sure that the people who have died get buried, and he actually attends all the funerals out of respect. That's not part of his job. That's what he feels like he needs to do. However, he has unwittingly, he didn't intend to do this, but when he first started the job 5 years ago, he accidentally led his boss to believe that he was happily married with 2 children. And he's made up this elaborate story about them over these 5 years. And in actuality, it's just pure imagination. He himself is alone. So this was really interesting. I will say there are trigger warnings for attempts at suicide in this one, but I found this to be really heartwarming. It's a little bit like Eleanor Oliphant as well, but also very different. But yeah, I enjoyed this. And then I finally finished another big one. Kristens Daughter by Sigrid Undset. This is a Nobel Prize winning author. This is actually 3 books in one. So I read the first one, The Wreath, which is when Kristen is a teenager. Well, it starts when she's a child and goes through her teen years and meeting her lover slash future husband. This is set a long time ago, like the 14th century, I believe, in Norway. So Sigrid Undset is a very atmospheric writer. You get just an excellent, you feel like you're in the time period and the place. She's really good at that. I enjoyed the first book quite a bit. I picked this up because Britta is doing the female Nobel Prize winning series, and she did this one a few months ago. So Ange and I have been buddy reading it ever since. But yeah, the other thing I would say about this is, even though it's in the 14th century, it rings true for the messiness of family life and relationships between husbands and wives. And yeah, the middle book, I will say, was a little bit draggy, quite a bit draggy, almost slumpy. But the last book picked up quite a bit. And the other theme that it touched on historically is, the political scene with the kings and queens and all that with Sweden and Norway, which I don't know much about at all. And also religion. Religion played a huge role in that place and time, and in this book as well. And then I just finished recently Persuasion by Jane Austen, of course. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I was delighted as well because I'm reading through the Jane Austens. This is my 5th. And I had watched the movies multiple times for Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and Emma. So when I read those stories, it's hard to separate the movie visions from the book. And then I read, was it Mansfield Park, I think? And that one was okay. It didn't thrill me. This one thrilled me. I just was delighted by it. So it was just really great to be exposed to the story for the first time in the book. I loved that. And this one, the letter is just, the one if you've read it. I loved that letter. And the delivery of the letter, oh, that's so good. So now I'm going to have to, once I finish Northanger Abbey, I'm going to have to, I guess next year, go through and read them all again, because I have no clue which is my favorite, how I would rank these books. I think it requires a second run through for that, okay? And then I read Women Talking by Miriam Toews. Finally, I feel like I'm the last person in my friend group to get to this book, but it was worth the wait. I love this. The language in it is so incredibly gorgeous. This is based on the true story of, I think it's set in Brazil, but it's a Mennonite colony in Brazil that is very, very patriarchal. The women just have no voice. They're speaking I think an antiquated form of German originating in Russia, something to that effect. And obviously no one in the region speaks that outside of this community of people. And some of the men in the community, 8 of them, which are, it's a very limited community. So these are their brothers and their husbands and their fathers. 8 of these men have been using large animal tranquilizer to put these women out at night and rape them. So yeah, this is a horrific thing that's happening. But Miriam Toews writes this story with such grace. Oh my goodness. And there's just a little bit of humor scattered in it. And the hard stuff, she just drops it just very lightly along the narrative, and you're just 2 sentences farther along, you go back and go, wow, it just really gets to you. This doesn't have a lot of plot. It's literally, just literally women talking over the course of 2 days about what they should do. Should they try to confront these men, or should they just leave? The thing is, the 8 men have been in custody in Brazil. In town, they were taken away because one of the women took a machete to them. So they didn't think the men were safe. So they let the local authorities take them away, but they've gone back to post bail because they decided that wasn't right for their men to be. The men decided it wasn't right for their other men to be in custody like that. So they've gone to get them, and the women are left behind trying to decide what they should do. But yes, gorgeous writing. A lot to think about in that one. And the last one I read, I do not have a physical copy of it. I listened to it on audio, actually, online. So that was We Cast a Shadow by Maurice Carlos Ruffin. You've probably seen it around. It has a very striking cover. It's white and black, with the black is a silhouette of a young boy all over the cover with an apple, the one. It's a gorgeous cover. I covet. But this book it's set in a slightly futuristic United States. So it reads very much like our modern society, but with a lot more racism back in the story. So amplified racism. And we're focusing in on a family. The dad is African American, the mother is white, and the little boy is, he could pass for white, except for a birthmark on his cheek that the father perceives that keeps growing. And this is a society where it's gotten so racist that they've developed a lot more medical technology to transform people of color so that they can pass as white. So lightening their skin, reshaping their facial features and things. So yes, the story revolves around the dad. The main character is the dad. You hear from his perspective throughout the book, and he's really unlikable. Anyway, that's my perception. He just can't get past, he's got blinders on about his kid's birthmark, and so really grated on my nerves big time. So the first 5 chapters that I read, I almost DNF'd it. I didn't really care for it at all. It was set in a corporate, so he's a lawyer. It was set in a corporate party that I found just uninteresting and somewhat offensive. And I kept on with it because I was buddy reading it. And I was glad I did. I think the book says a lot. So it went up and down for me, and whether I liked it or didn't like it, back and forth, back and forth. I thought the main character was pretty, he was unlikable, as I said, but there were a couple points where I thought that he was finally saying something where I understood where he was coming from and was going to sympathize with him. But then, the next chapter he would do something incredibly gross, and I just hated him again. No holds barred, I hated him. So that just, a couple of times that happened. So I wasn't sure where the author was taking me with that. I didn't like that up and down. There's 2 other things that bothered me from the writing perspective. The boy, he was written as like a 12-year-old, almost 13, and yet he was written as being much younger, and that just like in the way he was interacting with his parents and everything, you know, it was written like he was quite a bit younger. So that was very disconcerting for me. It's like, you know, how old is this kid? How old do you really want him to be? And the other thing is, to borrow terminology from Robert from Barter Hordes, who I was also reading it with, it's got a very shotgun effect to it. So he just jumps around in the narrative all over the place from chapter to chapter. And since I was listening to it on audio, I think that affected my enjoyment. I think if I had been physically reading it, I could have mentally slowed down between the chapters, but really it's just like all over the place. Boom, 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 boom. Anyway, all that to say, toward the end, and I won't spoil it for you, but toward the end, you hear something from the perspective of the son. So it's not, it's still through the filter of the father, but you hear the son say some really important things that make the story really make sense. And we cast a shadow. Just think about the effect that we have on our kids and through the generations. And I'll just stop there. So what I'll say is, if you are a reader that needs a good narrative and good character development to appreciate a story, it's probably not a book for you. It is very, very much a satire and thematically driven. So yeah, just think about that and decide whether, you know, it's a book for you or not. Anyway, so I don't know if you were keeping count, but I read 10 books in the first 10 days of the month. Yes, I did. Hopefully I will be back on the 20th and be able to say that I'm 20 for 20. I'll keep you posted. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon. Bye.